Schizophrenia. You know how sometimes you see people talking to empty space on trains or in the street? Usually a being that everyone is trying not to touch. Mostly people are mentally ill. They think they are suffering from hallucinations. But what if these hallucinations are not hallucinations? About 10 years ago. At the time, I had just entered university and was out drinking every day at new parties and mixers. Then I met Akito in the same circle. Akito was a good-looking guy who talked well, but he was very humble and we soon became friends. Since I lived alone and my house was near the university, we drank almost every day and were often called the alcoholic duo. I was not too happy about being called Akito and the duo because of my good looks and prominence. In fact, Akito and I were the strongest drinkers in the circle, so we drank a lot compared to the others. Akito was always in the center of the circle because he was good looking and stood out from the crowd. One day, when I was enjoying my college life, I had just entered my second year. Akito had a girlfriend named Chie at that time, and suddenly he received a phone call from her at around 2 a.m. Akito's condition is strange, so please come to my house right away. I was in the middle of a drinking party, so I didn't want to bother her, but she was so fierce that I asked her what was going on, but she insisted on coming anyway, so I left the party and went to Akito's house as soon as I could. When I arrived at the house, I found an unbelievable scene. A was dancing on the desk in a loincloth, in a posture just like a sumo wrestler Sonkyu. I don't mean he was dancing, he was moving his hands like in a Bon dance. On the desk was a small plate of what looked like sake and salt. Frankly, if it were just this, I'd think the jolly Akito was doing it in a drunken stupor, but with tears streaming down his face. Gokanjyo! Gokanjyo! Shouting loudly. The smell of piss spread all around the place. It must have been Akito's because his desk and loincloth were soaked. She was completely unresponsive when I tried to talk to her, and she kept dancing and screaming at the top of her lungs. When I asked her what was going on, she told me that she had originally planned to go to her room to play, but when I pressed the intercom, she didn't answer. She said she heard loud voices coming from inside, so she turned the doorknob and found that it was unlocked, so she went inside and saw the same scene I had seen. The reaction was exactly what I described earlier. They'd been dancing for at least an hour before I got there. I knew I was in trouble. He wasn't one of those guys, but I figured Akito must have done drugs. I calmed Chie down and explained to her that maybe this guy is on drugs, and it might be a police matter, but his body is important, so I'm calling an ambulance. Chie agreed and decided to call an ambulance right away. When the paramedics arrived, Akito's condition did not change, but when he was about to be carried away, he started to get violent, so the police were called and it became quite a big deal. The police also questioned me and even suspected us of drug use. But as a result, no drugs were detected in Akito's body. About 3 days later, he was discharged from the hospital. He seemed to have a seizure of unknown cause and had no memory of that time. I was relieved to hear that I must have been hallucinating from drinking too much. I was making light of the fact that I was finally a real alcoholic. But from that day on, Akito started to go a little crazy. He became more and more spaced out, and I frequently saw him talking to the wall in a whisper. He gradually stopped coming to school. I was worried about him and went to visit him many times, but he would just tell me that he was feeling a little sick. Finally, he asked me not to come to school until he heard from me because he wanted to keep a little distance from me. To be honest, I was pretty depressed, but it seemed silly to worry after being told this much, so I spent some time thinking that I wouldn't go until I heard from her, even if I didn't want to. Around 3 months later, Akito suddenly contacted me. I had something I wanted to talk to you about, so please come to my house. I had a feeling that something unusual was going on, so I decided to head home right away. When I opened the front door, the smell of alcohol and rotten food filled the room. I was drinking with a scrawny, bearded Akira. I was surprised and Akito said, "You may not believe me, but I want to tell you the truth." I had no idea what the requirements were, but I decided to listen anyway. Then Akito started to tell me something like this. About 3 days before his first seizure, Akito and a friend were camping in the next prefecture. When they were grilling meat, there was a terrible smell coming from the fire, and when they removed the wood from the furnace, a large amount of what looked like burnt animal hairs came out. I was so disgusted that I started over again with a new furnace, but from that day on, strange things began to happen. Whenever I was in town, at school, or in the car, I would suddenly smell that animal hair, and whenever I smelled it, I would see a woman in a kimono with no eyes and no nose, just a mouth at the edge of my field of vision. She stares at me with her mouth turned into a grin. And every time I see her, she comes closer. What? That's a complete hallucination. Akito asked me to listen to the end of the story anyway. I nodded and Akito began to tell me the rest of the story. The day before she was taken to the ambulance, Akito had a strange dream. In the dream, Akito met an old man who claimed to be his guardian spirit. The old man explained that the woman in the kimono you are seeing now was a woman killed by your ancestors a long time ago, and that even after she died, she continued to torment them with her grudge, but that they could no longer stand it any longer, and that they had severed the ties between them and their descendants, on condition that my bloodline would never come near that land in the future. Akito happened to set foot on the land at the camp, and the karma was born again. If this continues, he will be tormented and killed. If you don't like it, then tomorrow at the appointed time, prepare what I'm going to tell you and do as I tell you. As soon as he finished explaining everything, he woke up. I had actually seen the woman frequently, and I did what he told me to do, grasping at straws. However, from the moment I got on the desk, I have no recollection of you or her coming to me, or of being taken to the emergency room at all. And it didn't end there. After that day, the woman started talking to me directly. I know it sounds like a lie when I say it like this, but she's talking to me very clearly. How I have suffered. You have a duty to suffer. And those around you suffer too. When I speak, you respond in kind. I say, why me? I say, because you went back on your word. I say I didn't know that. I say it's because karma was born. I don't care where you are, you'll talk to me. Ignore it, and you'll feel so depressed that you'll want to die. You want to die, but you can't. All you feel is pain. You know that Naruto movie Sharingan? You know the Naruto story where the guy gets killed over and over in a short period of time, and it makes you feel like this. Akito said in tears. The only time he is released is when he sleeps, and when he follows the advice of his ancestors that comes to him in his dreams, and he has trouble falling asleep, so he is always drinking. When he talks to people on the street, they think he's mumbling to himself, right? I don't remember when I'm performing the advice, ritual, and I'm too scared to go out because I don't know what I'm going to do, like the other day. I'm not crazy. I'm talking to you right now. Right? I'm not hallucinating or anything. It's just that the feeling of a woman coming to me is getting shorter and shorter. I don't think I can stand it any longer, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to go to the hospital in the near future, because I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. I just wanted to tell you this one last thing. That's what Akito said. To be honest, hallucinations are so bad. I thought. I can't believe that Akito, who was so handsome and popular, turned out to be like this. I was so surprised. Sure enough, a few days later, Akito was admitted to a psychiatric ward. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic with a severe alcohol dependency. Aki, who was very popular, and I talked about it a lot in the university for a while, and I started to refrain from going out drinking. At the time, I was simply scared of the horror of alcoholism. I went to visit him quite often, and I saw his condition getting worse day by day, so I was quite scared. After a month, I couldn't even speak properly. Soon after that, I received a call from Akito's parents. They were in the hospital room and asked for my contact information, and told me that he was quitting college and moving to the countryside to recuperate. I had a lot of personal belongings at Akito's house, so I decided to go get them before I moved out. When I arrived, Akito's parents were also packing up their stuff. I was feeling a little sentimental because there were many pictures of me and my college friends on the cork board on Akito's desk. Then, one picture caught my attention. It was probably from that barbecue. There were 6 of us sitting around a fire, and the picture was filled with a woman in a kimono with no eyes and no nose, and she was thin and translucent. What? The woman's features matched exactly what Akito had described. I pocketed that picture with a general hair-raising sensation all over my body. I felt like I had to do something. After that, I didn't go to any exorcism or burning, and I didn't talk about this to others or discuss it with them. I was somehow convinced that there was nothing I could do. Why I felt that way is a mystery to me now. Then I changed my view of people talking to emptiness on the street. Because some of them might really be fighting against something. I'll end by telling you why I decided to write this story 10 years later. It all started with a medium I met through work, who is said to be famous in the world. The medium was just a regular old lady who worked as a volunteer insurance saleswoman. She was an insurance saleswoman and a volunteer who saw such things as well. I wondered myself why I had decided to talk to her about something that happened more than 10 years ago, but for some reason I thought it was because she was a medium. I took the pictures and explained everything to her, and she told me that he was tormented by something bad and that his guardian spirit was probably a lie. He's being played with for the fun of it. Even if he hasn't done anything wrong, he can become like this when a trigger or a wavelength comes along. If it's persistently bad, there's nothing we can do about it. There is a path that opens up by entering that path and practicing, but it's just as hard and steep. There are many such unlucky people in the world. Forget about him. The sharpness of her eyes made it impossible for me to say anything. I think there are a lot of absurd and heartless things in the world. Believe it or not, I actually experienced it. This is the end of the story. Thank you for listening to the end.